The village of Ashford sat at the edge of a great forest that nobody dared to enter. The trees there were tall and black, even in summer. The leaves never turned green. The birds never sang inside it. People called it the Deadwood, and for good reason. Strange lights moved between the trees at night. Strange sounds came out before dawn. The old people in the village said that something lived in there, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. They said that if it ever woke up, the whole world would burn. Cale did not believe in old stories. He was a boy of 16, lean and sharp-eyed, with dark hair that always fell across his forehead no matter how many times he pushed it back. He lived with his uncle, a blacksmith named Orrin, in a small house near the well. Cale's parents had died when he was very young. A fever had taken them both in the same winter. He did not remember their faces clearly. He only remembered his mother's voice, soft and low, singing to him before sleep. Orrin was a good man, but a quiet one. He worked from early morning until late at night, hammering iron into tools and shoes and locks. He did not talk much. He fed Cale, clothed him, and taught him how to work. That was enough, Cale supposed. But there were nights when the house felt very small and very silent, and Cale would sit outside on the stone step and look at the deadwood in the distance and wonder what was on the other side of it. Nobody had ever gone through and come back. That was the truth of it. A few brave or foolish men had walked in over the years, and none had returned. The forest just swallowed them. Some people said the trees themselves moved to trap you. Others said the ground had holes that led nowhere. Cale thought there was probably a simpler answer. The men had gotten lost or fallen or been taken by wolves. Forests were dangerous. That was not magic. That was just life. But one morning in late autumn, something happened that changed everything Cale thought he knew. He was carrying water from the well when he saw a girl sitting on the road outside the village gate. She was not from Ashford. He knew every face in Ashford, and this face was new. She looked about his age, maybe a little older. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark skin was covered in dust, and her hair was loose and tangled. She had no bag, no horse, no shoes. She was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, staring at the ground. Cale put down the water bucket and walked over to her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She looked up. Her eyes were a pale gray, almost silver, and they were very calm for someone who looked like they had been through something terrible. "No," she said, "just tired." "Where did you come from?" She looked at him for a moment before she answered. "Through there," she said, and she nodded toward the deadwood. Cale stared at her, then he looked at the forest, then back at her. "Nobody comes through the deadwood," he said. "I did," she said simply. He wanted to say she was lying. He wanted to say she must have come from the road to the north and was confused, or perhaps sick. But there was something about the way she said it, quiet and flat, like it was just a fact and not a story, that made him hold his tongue. He picked up the water bucket. "Come on," he said, "you can eat something." Her name was Sable. That was all she told him at first. She ate everything Orrin put in front of her without speaking, which made Orrin raise his eyebrows but say nothing. After she finished, she sat back and looked around the small kitchen with those silver eyes, calm and slow, like she was recording everything she saw. "You really came through the deadwood?" Cale asked again. "Yes." "How?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the inside of her torn jacket and pulled something out. It was a stone, small, flat, about the size of a coin, and dark red, almost the color of dried blood. When she held it up, it caught the light from the window and seemed to glow faintly from inside, like a coal that had not quite gone out. "This," she said, "it kept them away from me." "Kept what away?" She lowered the stone and looked at him. "The things that live in there," she said. "They are everywhere. You cannot see them in the daylight, but at night they come close. They make sounds. They make you see things from your memories, your fears. Most people run, and when they run, they fall or they get lost and the things find them." She paused. "I did not run. I held the stone and I walked straight." Cale leaned forward. "What is it, the stone?" "It is called the ember," she said, "or part of it. There was one, a long time ago, a great stone that burned at the heart of the world and kept the old darkness away. It was broken into pieces. This is one of them. She closed her fingers around it. I was sent to find the others. Oren, who had been leaning against the wall pretending not to listen, cleared his throat. Sent by who? Sable looked at him. By the last of the fire keepers, she said. An old woman who lives on the far side of the deadwood. She told me the darkness is waking. She said the pieces of the ember must be gathered before the first snow of winter. If they are not, the old thing in the forest will wake fully, and it will not sleep again. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the street and pushed dead leaves against the door. Kale looked at the stone in her hand. It was still glowing faintly, that soft red light pulsing like a heartbeat. How many pieces are there? He asked. 5, she said, and we have one. Kale looked at his uncle. Oren looked back at him with the expression he always wore when he already knew what Kale was going to do and did not like it but could not stop it. We, Kale said. Sable looked at him steadily. The firekeeper said I would find help in the first village past the deadwood. She said there would be a boy here, one who asks too many questions and believes too little. She tilted her head slightly. That sounds like you. Kale opened his mouth, then he closed it. Outside, the deadwood stood black and still against the gray sky, and somewhere deep inside it, something shifted in its long, dark sleep. Kale did not sleep that night. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind outside. Every now and then he would hear something, a creak, a distant sound from the direction of the deadwood, and he would hold his breath and wait. Nothing came. After a while the sound stopped, and there was only silence and the slow drip of rain beginning to fall on the roof. He thought about what Sable had said. 5 pieces, one already in her hand, 4 more somewhere in the world and winter coming fast. He thought about the darkness she had described, the things in the forest that made you see your fears and made you run. He thought about what it would mean if the old creature in the deadwood truly woke up. He did not fully believe it. He was not sure he could, but he had seen that stone glowing in her palm and that he could not explain away. By morning, he had made up his mind. Oren was already at the forge when Kale came down. Sable was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of water, the stone resting flat on the wood in front of her. In the gray morning light it did not glow, but it still had a deep redness to it, like something warm was trapped inside. I am coming with you, Kale said to her. She did not look surprised. All right, she said. I want to know everything, where we are going, what we are looking for, what is trying to stop us. She nodded. I will tell you what I know. It is not everything, but it is enough to start. Oren came in from the forge, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at Kale, then at Sable, then at the stone. He sat down heavily in his chair and said nothing for a long moment. How long? He finally said. I do not know, Kale admitted. Before the first snow. Oren rubbed his face. Then he stood up, went to the back room and came back with a worn leather pack. He set it on the table and began filling it quietly, dried meat, a small knife, a flint, a roll of bandage cloth, 2 small coins. He worked without speaking. When he was done, he pushed the pack across the table to Kale and looked at him with tired eyes. Come back, he said. Kale picked up the pack. I will. They left Ashford before the other villagers were awake. The road out of the village ran north, and that was the direction Sable said they needed to go first. The second piece of the ember, she told him as they walked, was somewhere in the town of Velt, a larger settlement 3 days north of Ashford, built at the foot of the Grey Mountains. The firekeeper told me it was taken there by a merchant many years ago, Sable said. He did not know what it was. He thought it was a jewel. He sold it. Or traded it, and it passed from hand to hand. The keeper said the last she knew, it was in the market of Velt, sitting in a trader's stall like an ordinary stone. Then it should be easy to get, Kale said. Sable shook her head slowly. Nothing about this will be easy. The darkness knows we are looking. It sends things ahead of itself, creatures, and sometimes people who have been touched by it. They will try to find the pieces before we do or take them from us after. Kale glanced sideways at her. Creatures, like the ones in the deadwood. Yes, but smaller outside the forest. Shadows, mostly. They cannot do much in daylight, but when the sun goes down they are stronger. And the stone protects us. While we are close to it, yes, but it is only one piece. The closer we get to gathering all five, the stronger the protection will be. With only one, we must be careful. The morning was cold and the sky was the color of iron. The road was empty in both directions. On their left, fields of dry grass stretched away to low hills. On their right, the deadwood ran alongside the road for some time before finally curving away east. Kale watched it as they walked. The trees stood perfectly still even though the wind was moving. That bothered him more than he expected. They stopped at midday to eat and rest beside a small stream. Sable took off her shoes. She had borrowed an old pair from Kale's uncle and put her feet in the cold water. She winced slightly but did not pull them out. "Tell me about yourself," Kale said. It came out a little blunt and he added, "You know where I am from. I do not know anything about you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I grew up on the other side of the deadwood in a village called Marin. My mother was a healer. She knew some of the old ways, herbs, roots, small things. She knew about the ember. She used to tell me the story when I was small." She paused, looking at the water. "She died 2 years ago. Fever." "I am sorry," Kale said. She nodded once, like she had accepted the thing long ago and the word just reminded her of it. "After she died, I went to find the firekeeper. I had heard my mother mention her. She lives alone, deep in the hills east of Marin. She is very old. She told me what was happening, that the darkness was growing again, that the pieces needed to be gathered." Sable looked at the stone, which she held in her hand even when they walked. "She said my mother always knew it would come to this. That she had hoped it would wait longer." Kale said nothing. There was nothing useful to say, so he stayed quiet, which was the better choice. They walked until the light began to fade, and then made camp at the edge of a small wood of ordinary trees, oak and birch, pale and bare in the autumn cold. Kale built a fire and Sable placed the ember stone near it. In the firelight, its glow was easier to see, that steady red pulse beating softly like something alive. In the middle of the night, Kale woke suddenly. He did not know why. The fire had burned low. Sable was asleep on the other side of it, her breathing slow and even. Everything was still. Then he heard it, a sound at the edge of the trees. Not loud. Not the sound of an animal moving through brush. It was lower than that, thinner, like air being pulled through a very small space. And with it came a feeling, cold and creeping, that moved up from his stomach into his chest. He sat up and looked toward the trees. There was nothing there, just shadow between the trunks. But the shadows were moving, not with the wind. They moved slowly, deliberately, the way something moves when it is being careful not to be seen. One of them slid forward just slightly into the edge of the firelight. It had no shape, or rather its shape kept changing. For a moment it looked like a man. Then it looked like something with too many edges, wrong angles, impossible and flat. Then it was just shadow again. Kale reached out without thinking and grabbed the ember stone from where it sat by the fire. The red glow immediately brightened. Not much, but enough. A low warmth spread up through his hand, and the shadow at the tree line stopped. It hung there for a moment like something pressing against a door that would not open. Then it slid back slowly into the dark between the trees and was gone. Kale sat holding the stone until the sky began to lighten in the east. He did not sleep again. They reached the town of Velt on the third day, just before midday. It was bigger than Ashford, much bigger. The streets were wide and crowded, full of traders and carts and animals and noise. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. People called out prices and argued and laughed. After 2 days of empty roads and cold silence, the noise of it felt almost wrong, too sudden and too bright. Kale had never been to Velt before. He stayed close to Sable as they pushed through the crowd, keeping his eyes open. Sable moved with purpose, threading through the market stalls without hesitating, like she had a map in her head that she was following. "The keeper said the stone would be near the east end of the market," she said without turning. "A stall with old goods, second-hand things, junk, pieces of metal and stone. It would not look special." "How will we know it when we see it?" Kale asked. Sable held up her hand slightly. The ember stone was wrapped in a piece of cloth tied around her palm, hidden but close to her skin. "It will react," she said. "The pieces know each other." They found the east end of the market after a quarter of an hour of walking. The stalls here were quieter and less busy. They sold old tools, used boots, cracked pottery, bundles of dried plants. One man sat behind a table covered in a strange mix of objects, a rusted compass, a carved wooden bird, several coins, a pile of small stones and chunks of metal. He was old and thin, with a white beard and small eyes that watched everything. Sable slowed as they approached, then she stopped. She pressed her wrapped hand to her chest where the stone was. Her eyes went to the table. "There," she said quietly. Kale looked. Among the pile of stones on the table, one was different. It was darker than the rest, a deep earthy red, flat and coin-shaped. Even in the midday light it seemed to pull the eye toward it in a way the others did not. They walked up to the table. The old trader watched them with his small eyes. "How much for that one?" Kale asked, pointing at the red stone. The man looked at it. Then he looked at Kale, then at Sable. Something shifted in his expression just slightly, and Kale felt a prickle on the back of his neck. "Not for sale," the man said. Kale blinked. "It is in a pile of stones on a market table." "The stones are decoration," the man said. "Not for sale." Sable stepped forward. She met the old man's eyes. "How long have you had it?" she asked. The man stared at her. Then very slowly the expression on his face changed. The small-eyed watchfulness dropped away, and what was under it was something older and stranger. His mouth pressed into a thin line. "Long enough to know what it is," he said. "Long enough to know you should not have it." Kale's hand moved to the small knife at his belt. "You have been touched," Sable said to the man, her voice even and flat. "It got to you before we arrived." The trader said nothing, but his hands moved under the table. What happened next was fast and strange. The man swept his arm across the table, knocking half the objects to the ground, and lunged for the red stone himself. Sable was faster. She snatched it with her free hand, the other pressing the wrapped ember stone to her chest. The moment her fingers closed around the second piece, both stones lit up, even through the cloth. The glow burst out red and warm, flooding the table with color. The old trader recoiled. He fell backward off his stool, clutching his face with both hands. Around them, the people at nearby stalls turned to look. The trader's hands dropped. He was blinking, confused, his face slack and empty now, like a man who had just woken from a dream and did not know where he was. Sable backed away quickly. Kale followed. They walked fast through the market, then faster. They did not run until they were out of the east gate of Velt, and then they ran for a while, until the town was behind them and the road opened up ahead. When they finally stopped, both of them were breathing hard. Sable unwrapped the cloth from her hand and held both stones together in her palm. The two pieces sat side by side, both glowing, the pulses beating in rhythm with each other like two hearts that had found the same speed. "Is he all right?" Kale asked, still thinking of the old man. "He will be," Sable said. "When the darkness takes someone like that, it does not keep them forever, not yet. It only holds them until the piece it wants is gone. Once we took it, the hold broke." She paused. "But it knows we have two pieces now. It will move faster." Kale wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Where next?" Sable looked south. Her eyes were distant for a moment, like she was reading something no one else could see. "The third piece is in the Saltlands," she said. "Far south. A week's walk, maybe more." Kale thought of Oren in the small house near the well. He thought of how quiet everything had been there, and how that quiet had always felt like something missing. He had not expected to feel so far from it so quickly. "Then we go south," he said. They made camp that night in a hollow off the road, sheltered by a low bank of earth and a cluster of dry bushes. Kale lay on the hard ground and looked up at the stars while Sable sat with her back against the bank, holding both stones in her hands. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask," she said. "I may not answer." "Why did the Fire Keeper choose you for this? You said your mother knew the old ways, but you are not a keeper yourself. You do not have magic, you just have the stone." Sable was quiet for a while. The stars moved slowly overhead. The night was cold and very still. "She said I had the right kind of stubbornness," Sable said finally. "She said the last time someone tried to gather the pieces, they were brave and clever and skilled, and they failed. She said they failed because when things became hard and frightening, they let go. They chose safety." She looked at the two stones in her hand. "She said she needed someone who was too stubborn to let go, even when it hurts, even when everything says to stop." Kale thought about that. "And you think I have that too, the right stubbornness?" Sable looked over at him. Her silver eyes caught the faint light of the stones. "You watched a shadow walk out of the trees in the dark and you did not run," she said. "You picked up the stone and you held it. That is enough." He turned back to the stars. Somewhere to the south, 3 more pieces were waiting. And somewhere in the dark, the old thing in the deadwood breathed in its long, slow sleep and pulled the shadows of the world a little closer. The saltlands began as a smell before they became a sight. 3 days south of Velt, the air changed. It became sharp and flat, a dry salt smell that got into the back of the throat. The grass thinned and turned pale, then vanished altogether, replaced by cracked white earth that crunched under their feet. The sky here was wider somehow, like the land was so flat it pushed the horizon further away. There were no trees, no hills, no shelter. Just the white plain stretching on in every direction, and the road cutting through it like a gray scar. Kale had never seen anything like it. He kept stopping to look around, which made Sable impatient. "Stop doing that," she said. "I just want to see it," he said. "You can see it while you walk." He walked, but he still looked. The settlement they were heading to was called Cray, a small, hard place built where 2 old trade routes crossed in the middle of the saltlands. It had no walls, no gate, just a cluster of low stone buildings squatting against the white earth like they were trying not to be noticed. A few traders passed through it. Salt workers lived there, men and women who scraped the surface of the flats and packed the salt into sacks and sent it north. It was not a place people came to if they had a choice. They arrived toward evening of their 3rd day walking south. The light was orange and low. Long shadows stretched across the salt flats. The buildings of Cray cast no shadows of their own, as if they were too small and too tired for that. The 3rd piece was different from the others. Sable had explained this on the road. The 1st piece had been in her hand since the Fire Keeper gave it to her. The 2nd had been sitting unprotected on a market table. But the 3rd, the keeper had warned, was being guarded. "By who?" Kale had asked. "A woman named Dara," Sable had said. "She was a soldier once. She found the piece in the ruins of an old fort she was clearing out years ago. She knew it was something strange. She kept it, and the keeper says she has guarded it ever since, but she does not know what it really is. She thinks it is cursed." "Is it?" "No, but it has power, and power frightens people." They found Dara without much trouble. In a place as small as Cray, a stranger only needed to ask one question to find another stranger. A salt worker pointed them to a building at the far edge of the settlement, a low stone house with a heavy door and a single small window that had a cloth nailed over it from the inside. Sable knocked. There was a long silence, then a voice low and sharp from behind the door. "What do you want?" "We are looking for Dara," Sable said. "We have not come to take anything. We only want to talk." Another silence. Then the door opened just a crack, just enough for one dark eye to look them over. The eye moved from Sable to Kale and back again. Then the door opened wider. Dara was not what Kale had expected. She was a woman of about 40, short and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had spent many years in hard weather. Her arms were scarred. Her hands were large and strong. She looked at them both without any warmth but without fear either, just measuring them the way someone measures a wall before deciding if it needs to come down. "Come in," she said, "hands where I can see them." The inside of the house was spare and clean. No decoration, no clutter. A table, 2 chairs, a small stove, a cot. On a shelf above the cot, wrapped in a piece of dark cloth, sat a shape that both Kale and Sable looked at immediately. Dara noticed. She stepped between them and the shelf without making it look like that was what she was doing. "You know what it is," she said. It was not a question. Sable held out her hand, unwrapping the cloth to show the 2 pieces. They glowed quietly in the dim room. Dara stared at them. Her jaw tightened. "The Keeper sent you," she said. "Yes," said Sable. "The old woman in the hills." Dara's voice was flat. "She sent word once, years ago, that someone would come for it eventually. I thought she was mad." She paused. "I am starting to think she was not." "She was not," Sable agreed. "The darkness is waking. We need the pieces together." Dara looked at the cloth-wrapped shape on the shelf. She was quiet for a long time. Kale could see something working behind her eyes, not fear, but something close to reluctant acceptance. The kind of look a person has when they have been waiting for a thing to happen and now it has, and they cannot decide if they feel relieved or dread. "I have kept it for 11 years, Dara said. "The first year, strange things happened around me, shadows that moved wrong, a feeling at night like something was pressing against the walls." She glanced at them. "Then it stopped. I learned to keep it covered, keep it close. It became quieter." "Because you kept it safe," Sable said. "You did something important without knowing what it was." That seemed to land differently than Kale expected. Something in Dara's hard face shifted, just slightly, just for a moment. Then she crossed to the shelf, took down the wrapped piece, and held it out to Sable. Sable took it. She unwrapped it carefully. The third piece was larger than the others, thick and rough-edged, like it had been broken from something bigger and fast. The moment it was uncovered and her fingers touched it, all 3 pieces blazed up together. The light filled the small room, warm and red, like a fire that did not burn. Dara stood back and watched it, and for just a moment she looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. Then she sat in one of the chairs and looked at them steadily. "You need 2 more," she said, not a question. "Yes," Kale said. "Then you need someone who knows the roads," she said. "I have been everywhere from here to the coast. I know where the dangerous places are and where the safe ones are and how to tell the difference." She paused. "And I have nothing else to do." Sable and Kale looked at each other. Kale said, "Can you keep up?" Dara looked at him. It was a look that said many things, most of them unflattering. "Boy," she said, "I once walked 60 miles in 2 days across stone ground in winter to reach a fort before it fell. I think I can keep up with you." Kale decided not to say anything else. That night, with 3 pieces of the ember glowing together in Sable's hands, the shadows that had been following them stopped at the edge of the settlement and did not come closer. Kale watched them from the doorway. Those thin, wrong shapes hanging at the very edge of the light, and he felt something he had not quite felt before, not safety, not confidence exactly, but something moving in that direction. Something that felt like maybe, just maybe, this could be done. But 4 days later, when they found out where the 4th piece was, that feeling got considerably harder to hold on to. The 4th piece was inside the deadwood. Not near it, not at the edge of it. Inside it, deep in the middle, in a place that Sable said the Fire Keeper had called the Heart Grove, a clearing somewhere in the center of the forest where the original ember stone had first been broken apart, many hundreds of years ago. Kale stood on the road north of the Saltlands and stared at Sable when she told him this. Dara stood beside him with her arms folded, her face unreadable. "She told you this before we left," Kale said. "Yes," Sable said. "And you did not say it then because—" "Because you would not have come," she said simply. He opened his mouth to argue with that and then closed it, because she was almost certainly right. Dara cleared her throat. "The forest that kills people," she said. "You want us to walk into it." "We have 3 pieces now," Sable said. "With 3, the protection is stronger. The things inside will not be able to reach us as easily, and I have walked through once already." "Once," Dara said, "alone with 1 piece." "Yes." Dara was quiet for a moment. "And you came out the other side." "Obviously." Dara looked at the sky for a moment as if asking it for patience. Then she looked back down and said, "All right, tell us what to expect." They sat by the road and Sable talked for a long time. She told them what she had seen on her first crossing, the darkness between the trees, the way sound changed inside the forest, the way the light never quite reached the ground. She told them about the things that lived there, the shapeless shadows that fed on fear and confusion. She told them what they did, how they made you see things, pulled images from your memory, your nightmares, your grief, and turned them into shapes that moved toward you in the dark and whispered your name. "They are not real," she said. "Whatever you see, whatever speaks to you, it is not real. It is just a shape made from your own thoughts." "That does not make it easier," Kale said. "No," she agreed. "It does not, but knowing it is the only way through. You hold the thought that it is not real and you keep walking. You do not stop, you do not speak to whatever you see, and above all, you do not run." Dara nodded slowly. "I have fought real things my whole life, things I could cut and break. This is a different kind of problem." "It is," Sable said. She held up the 3 pieces. In daylight they glowed softly. "But we have something they do not. Stay close to these and walk." They entered the deadwood the next morning. Kale had expected the darkness to be gradual, to creep in slowly as the trees grew thicker and the path faded, but it was immediate. 1 step past the tree line and the whole world changed. The light dropped like something had blown out a candle. The cold deepened. The sound of the road, wind, birds, the distant noise of the world cut off completely. There was only the forest. The black trees rose up on every side, tall and perfectly still, their bare branches lacing together overhead like fingers interlaced, blocking out the sky. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. Sable walked in front, both hands cupped around the 3 pieces. The red glow lit the ground ahead of them in a circle that stretched about 10 feet in every direction. Beyond that circle, the dark was absolute. Dara walked to Kale's right. Her hand rested on the short sword at her hip. She said nothing. Her eyes moved steadily from side to side, sweeping the dark the way a soldier sweeps a room when they do not know what is in it. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then Kale heard his name. It came from somewhere to the left, off in the dark, and it was in his mother's voice. Soft and low, the way he barely remembered it, just his name once. He stopped walking. Sable's hand came back and grabbed his arm without her turning around. "Keep moving," she said. He forced his feet to move. His whole body wanted to go left, to push into the dark and find that voice. It was not loud, not desperate. That was the terrible thing about it. It was just quiet and familiar, the most ordinary sound in the world, and it cracked something open in his chest. "It is not real," he told himself. "It is just a shape." It said his name again. He kept walking. He fixed his eyes on the red glow ahead and he walked, and he did not look left, even when the voice changed slightly, became confused, then almost hurt, the way a voice sounds when someone is frightened and does not understand where you have gone. By the time the voice stopped, his hands were shaking and his jaw ached from being clenched so hard. Dara was walking in silence. Her face was rigid, closed off. Whatever she was seeing in the dark, she had locked a door on it and was holding it shut. Sable walked steadily, without slowing, without flinching. Whatever came at her from the dark, it could not find the same grip it found on the others. She had already been through once. She knew the shape of it. Deep in the forest, how deep Kale could not say, because time inside that dark moved strangely, the trees began to change. They grew wider apart. The ground rose slightly, and then ahead through the last row of trees Kale saw light. Not the red light of the ember pieces. Natural light, pale gray sky, open air, a clearing. The Heart Grove. It was a perfect circle of open ground, about 30 feet across. The trees around its edge were older and wider than any others they had seen, enormous dark columns of wood that had been standing for centuries. The sky above the clearing was visible for the first time since they had entered the forest, pale and wide and cold. In the center of the clearing, half buried in the black earth, sat a stone. It was larger than the other pieces, about the size of a fist, dark red, but with a crack running through it that leaked a thin thread of red light, steady and unwavering, like a lamp that had been burning alone in the dark for a very long time. The 3 pieces in Sable's hands blazed up when they came near it. The light poured out between her fingers, warm and urgent. She walked to the center of the clearing and kneeled down in the earth and picked up the 4th piece. The light that came off all 4 together was almost too bright to look at. Kale stood in the Heart Grove and felt the warmth of it on his face, and something loosened in his chest that had been tight since they entered the trees. Beside him, Dara let out a long, quiet breath. In the trees around the clearing, the shadows pressed at the edge of the light and could come no further. They shifted and turned like things looking for a way in and finding none. They had 4 pieces, 1 remained. Sable stood up and turned to face them. Her silver eyes were lit red by the stones. She looked tired, more tired than Kale had seen her look before. But she was standing straight, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "The last piece is north," she said. "High north. The keeper said it is in a place called the Ice Hold, a ruin in the mountains above the snowline." She paused and looked at the sky. The clouds were moving in from the west, gray and heavy, the kind that carried real cold. "We have maybe 12 days before the first snow," she said, "possibly fewer." Kale looked at the 4 glowing pieces in her hands. He thought of the shadows at the tree line, pressing and unable to get through. He thought of how far they had come from Ashford, from Velt, from the Saltlands. He thought of the voice in the dark that had said his name. He was tired too. His feet hurt. He was cold and hungry, and the thought of high mountains and deep snow made every part of him want to sit down. But then he thought of the thing sleeping in the deadwood. The old darkness, breathing slowly in its deep roots, turning in its long sleep. And he thought of what it would be like to wake up in a world where that thing had opened its eyes. He picked up his pack. "Then we go north," he said. They walked out of the Heart Grove, out of the deadwood, and into the pale, cold light of the afternoon. The shadows stayed behind them, but not far behind, and in the deep roots of the forest, something very old felt 4 pieces of its old enemy burning bright, and its slow sleep began, for the first time in many years, to grow thin.